Welcome to Generations, a show which helps people 50 and better lead happy, healthy, and productive lives. Here's today's moderator, Nadia Giordana.
Hello and welcome to Generations. I'm Nadia Giordana and I will be the moderator for today. First, let me introduce my co-hosts, Bob Johnston. Hi Bob, how are you today?
Very good, thank you. Hi.
It's good to have you here today.
It's fun, it's good to be out. So.
Yeah, especially when it's so cold, it's nice to be out here.
That's right.
At least it's warm in the studio.
Inside, yes.
And Gloria Van Demeltraat.
Thank you, Nadia. I'm delighted to be here. Being a writer myself, I'm excited about our guest.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. We're going to learn some things about writing romance novels.
I think so.
And Patricia Jackson, you are our guest today, our esteemed guest.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
And you write romance novels. Tell us just in a nutshell a little bit about what that's like, and we'll have lots of questions for you.
Well, I write romance novels in my spare time. My day job, I work as a data analyst for an insurance company. Oh. So in my spare time, my weekends, my evenings, when my husband is watching baseball, I write romance novels, which is kind of a funny time to be writing about romance, but that's usually when I get my best writing done. So,
Tell us, Patty, how did you get started writing romance? That's a really distinctive genre, and I'm curious about it.
well, I decided to start writing, which is, that's a big step in itself, is, the big choice, just decide to write a book.
And how did that happen first? Tell us.
Well, it actually has a little bit to do with Nadia. So, which is, I had read Nadia's father's book. He has a memoir about his time in Alaska. Mm-hmm. And I had read that, and I found it interesting. It was, like a diary sort of a thing.
It's like a journal,
like
yeah.
a journal.
Yeah.
And then I'd also read, I'd been watching a mini-series called Klondike, which was also set in Alaska. Mm-hmm. And I had found out that mini-series was originally based on a book by Bill Haskell, who was writing a memoir of going to Alaska, going to the gold rush. And I thought, I had been doing genealogy research, and genealogy research is kind of dry and boring. It's dates and names and things. And I thought, what's really interesting about those people is the story behind their lives. So I thought, well, I should really write about some of these people, but what should I, nobody would want to read boring genealogy things. So I thought, well, if I wrap that genealogy in a romance, that would be something people would buy and really be interested in, and would make it different. So,
and probably more along, I'm thinking along with you as to what I would do if I did it the way you do. Did this end up to be kind of a creative fiction?
yeah,
Part truth, part fiction?
part truth, part fiction,
Okay.
and that's kind of my tagline is romance with a real touch. So I try to put a real person or a real person's story in all of my books and all of my novels, and so I try to weave that together with a fiction, which is a little bit different, and it's probably not the best commercial way to go about it, but because it's not, it's not really a right to market. There isn't a huge market for that kind of a thing that is sitting out there, but it's I had an author friend who told me that you should write the book that you want to read.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I think that's the book I want to read, so that's what I've been writing. So.
And it seems to help make your characters real.
Right.
And I've read your first, is Leah's Choice your first book?
It's my fifth book.
Your fifth book. Okay, I've read your fifth book then. I'm going to have to get back to the first. But the characters in there were very real.
Thank you.
And I think maybe your method helps accomplish that, so don't let anybody tell you it's the wrong way.
That's right.
Well, and I think anybody's way of writing is the right way for them.
Yeah.
So,
Great, nicely put. Have you always been a writer? As a kid, did you write stories, or how did you really get into it?
I wrote a lot when I was a young person, you know, in high school, and I took a creative writing independent study when I was in high school, which I was supposed to write a novel when I was in high school, but I didn't finish it, like most teenagers don't. I started it and didn't finish it. And I always kind of had it on the side and thought, you know, I should finish writing a book sometime. And it was just sitting out there for 20 or 30 years, and then I decided, you know, I should actually do what I wanted to do when I was 15.
Yes. Did you finish that story then?
No, I didn't.
You never have?
I don't even know where it is. So.
It's still niggling back in your
Yeah,
mind.
probably
There's
back
still
there
time.
somewhere.
Yeah.
I was kind of crazy into, you know, dark things when I was a teenager, so I'm not sure I'd want to write that now.
I find it interesting when people choose the genre that they do. I have, I'm a mystery writer myself, and that those are the books that I like to read, so
Right.
that's what I write. I guess that's how it works. I have two very good friends who are romance writers and very successful, very prolific and very successful romance writers. And they are the ones, I had been writing nonfiction before, they're the ones that convinced me to write fiction. Have you done nonfiction stories? I know that you write a lot of short stories, correct?
Yeah, I do.
And have you done nonfiction as well?
I haven't ever done nonfiction aside from like an essay or something. Right. Recently, I just wrote a nonfiction piece for like about a park in, you know, my city. So, but other than that, I haven't really written nonfiction. No.
Yeah.
So. I enjoy the fiction piece of it, and you know, trying to build a scene and sort of screenwriting, sort of a feel to how I write. So I try to make things very real. So.
That's
And
great.
I think I heard, I was reading about some of the tips for writing, romance writing, and they talked about being able to create that person, that personality, that life, get to know them over time, but also being able to fix their lives if you choose to
Yeah.
as the author. And there's a certain amount of power and satisfaction in being able to fix certain things you might not be able to fix in your own life in real life.
Right. You get to play God in a little to a certain degree. And I try to have something wrong with all of my characters at the outset. You know, they have some major flaw, some huge thing that they need to overcome in their life. And so I try to make sure that they overcome it through the things that happen in the book. And that's what's hard about weaving a story together, is weaving a real person who had real problems together with the fake people who had fake problems and making them all work together. So
That's wonderful. I love your attitude toward that. When we write, memoir is the easiest type of writing to do because we know the characters, we're intimately acquainted with them, we know what they're thinking and doing. Fiction is a whole new world, and you are so wise when you say we need to know our characters. Tell us a little bit more about that. How do you get to know those characters, and how do you design them?
well, to some degree, I try to interview my characters before I start the book. I have like a list of questions that I ask, you know, I'm really just asking myself about this person. You know, what do they like? What are their quirks? Do they have something with their speech? What's their favorite color? What do they like to do with their spare time? You know, but I have like an in-depth question list of about 200 questions that I ask myself about, you know, the main characters mainly. The side characters I maybe don't ask quite so many questions about, but I go through that list of questions, you know, and I pick and choose which questions I really think are important for the character before I ever start a book.
How do you create the characters that interact with the main characters?
I try to have them like offset the main character. So if the main character has a major flaw, I'll have them be somebody who's really good at that particular thing that they have a flaw about. So they offset each other. And vice versa, what the main character is really good at. Say the main character is a writer. I'll have the other person, you know, maybe not be able to read or have a problem with reading or something like that. And and so they offset each other, they help each other, and that way you can bounce the characters off of each other a little better.
Tell us a little bit about conversation. Conversation is so important in a book. How do you work that out in your writing? Is conversation between the characters?
It's probably crazy because I just try to like think through the actual scene in my head before I write it. And I know there was one time where my husband and I were going out to dinner, and I had been thinking about this scene that I knew I was going to be writing, and I don't think I paid attention to him at all during that meal. I was having another conversation in my mind, and I mean, he just kind of looked at me like, "You're somewhere else, aren't you?" And yeah, I totally was. I was in that other conversation, and I think it through before I write it so that I have an idea of at least like the main points of what they're going to say to each other. Maybe once I get started writing it, then it'll sort of flow into a different conversation from what I originally thought of it. But I at least have the main ideas of where they're going to go in their conversation before I start writing the scene.
Do you figure in what's trending among all the other romance novels out there, or do you go off in your own direction?
I probably should. I might be a little more commercially successful if I did that. I know that there's like, there's a big trend for like steamy writers to write shorter novels and put them out more frequently. And, 3 of my books are steamy and 2 of them are not. And the 3...
Oh, which ones?
The House of Donato series is very steamy and the other 2 are not. And they say that you should make them shorter. And my first book was 100,000 words, and that's way not short. So, no, I don't really write to market, but I probably should.
What is the length of your books now? Are they how many words? Like
I generally write around 80,000 words.
80,000. Yeah, that's still
It's
a
a
big book.
decent sized book.
Yeah, it's still a good size book.
Well, speaking of steamy, isn't that hard to write?
Yes.
That is so, I think I tried it once because I had a reason in a piece of poetry to write something. And that is just the absolute hardest thing in the world.
It is really hard. I didn't want to cross over a line in my mind to be vulgar in any way. So I tried to keep it on the cleaner side of steamy and yet still be sort of a steamy sort of a book. So I ended up using a lot of euphemisms, and my husband and I joke about the euphemisms all the time. So it's like, yeah.
I noticed that you use your real name on your covers as the author. Many romance writers have a pseudonym, but you've got your real name. And how did you decide to do that, and does it work for you?
I used my real name because, I've got a kind of a boring real name. So I decided to use the boring real name since it would be sort of memorable in some way, because it's quick and easy to remember. And I hadn't seen another Patricia Jackson out there. I used my middle initial because I wanted to make sure that people could find me. And yet, I don't think it is actually successful because people have a hard time finding me sometimes. But once they do find me, then they do pretty well. So,
Do you go by Patricia ever, or do you call Patty?
I'm called Patty in my real
Patty.
life, but so I know if somebody's using the Patricia, they must be talking about my books in some way.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. What's the best thing about being a writer? What is the best thing about being a writer?
Well, I think it's opened up my life a lot. I have a lot of different friends now. I have a lot of interesting friends. I have New York Times best-selling erotica writer who's a friend of mine now. I've got, a writer who writes, vampire romance novels and, crazy things that I never would have thought, I have a friend who does that kind of thing. And I can honestly call them my friends. And I've met a lot of interesting people. It's opened my life. It's made my cell phone just insane because the thing is going off all the time with notifications about new things that I have to try to keep up with. I'm a self-published novelist, so you know, when you're self-published, you have to do pretty much everything yourself. You're your own publicist, you're your own publisher, you're doing a lot of things that you don't really know a lot about, and you have to learn a lot about it.
Formatting.
So, yes.
What questions, when you meet someone when you meet someone new and you're having a conversation and they ask you what you do and they find out that you're a romance novel, what are some of the most interesting questions people have asked you?
Well, my boss mainly asks me whether or not I've used him in any of the novels, and have you made me the villain in some fashion? And I have used some of the people that I've known from work in my books as maybe as a villain, but no, not necessarily.
People do really ask, don't they?
They do. They want to
do
know whether or
really
not
ask.
they're in the books. Yep, they do. So, and sometimes I do. In particular, I have an anthology of short stories about the way people met each other, and so it's meet cute stories, and I used like our friends, several of the stories of our friends. The story of how my husband and I met is in there, how his grandparents met is in there, how my parents met is in there. So I've used a lot of real people's stories in my stories, so it's, yeah, sometimes I really do use real people.
But they can't recognize themselves
No,
in fiction.
not usually.
That we really need to emphasize, I think, because that's a bad thing if people know that it is them that
Right.
you're talking about. Yeah.
We
Unless
have a-
they're thrilled.
Yeah,
Well, that's
Yeah,
true
right.
too.
unless they're thrilled. We have one of the stories in there is about a guy who has, he's pretty much an OCD character. He has his underwear match his car for the day. The color of his underwear matches his car. And, that's a little overboard for an OCD person. And we have a friend who's, he's very tidy and very, but so I just took his personality to the extreme.
Yes,
So,
yes.
and I did tell him about it, and he thinks it's great. He thinks it's hilarious. Like, oh, you did that. I can't believe you did that. So, yeah, it's good.
I've got a question that I've thought about myself, and it goes back to your characters and how well you know your characters and your characters talking together. Has it ever happened that your characters talking together changes your outline or your script or your plan in what's going to happen next?
It does sometimes do that, which is hard for me because I'm a plotter. I
Right.
really plot everything out ahead of time for my books, way far ahead of time, and I've got everything decided. So then once they're having a conversation and they change it, it means I have to go back and figure everything out again. And,
Right,
and I get kind of annoyed with my characters, like, what did you do that for? But I think it makes for a better book then.
So
when
your
they do that.
characters misbehave.
Yes, they
Yes,
do. Sometimes they do.
That's wonderful to hear because that happens to me too sometimes.
Yeah.
And it shows that you know your characters well enough that they are conversing and you're writing that dialogue, and all of a sudden those characters are changing it themselves.
Yeah.
I think that is really wonderful.
Yeah, it's you can't force your characters to be who they're not, right?
No.
You shouldn't be forcing them to say things that they wouldn't say, that goes against the grain of who they are. So sometimes I'll catch myself like, oh, I don't think they would say that. I have to stop.
Yeah.
It's like something is really wrong with this scene. I have to stop and rethink this whole thing. And that's okay to rethink it. The
I
book
would-
that I'm writing right now,
Yeah.
I've
I
redone
would
3
watch
times.
a movie on that subject. If it were a movie, I would watch that.
Yep.
And I will read your books. I can't wait to get one now. Yeah.
Do you keep track of who your audience is, age groups and gender and all of that stuff?
I didn't at first, but then I realized that, okay, I don't really write to market. I should find out what my market is. So I did do like a poll of the people who sign up for my newsletter, and because that's really the only way that I know who is actually buying my books. And I was really surprised to find out that most of my readers are older. They're usually, over 60. And I was surprised that
Yeah.
over 60 people wanted to read that steamy stuff about college kids, but
Yeah,
no, I guess they do.
Brings
So-
back memories.
Brings
I
back
suppose.
memories.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
or hopes, maybe.
Yeah, maybe, yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah. No, and that's good. So now I know that, okay, my readers are mainly older folks. It's interesting because my friends, they, most of my friends have younger audiences that are, in their 20s and 30s. So, when when they are suggesting doing some things with their social media and things like that, I'm thinking, I'm not sure my audience knows how to do Instagram. I'm not sure that they're going to be able to do an Instagram live thing. I have to figure out how into social media and all these things the older population is getting to be.
So you're writing to that now.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great.
And are you very active? I'm not active very much on Instagram, so I haven't seen you. Are you active on Instagram or Facebook or social media?
I'm trying to be, but it's really hard to be on all of them, right?
It is hard.
I mainly stick to Facebook and Pinterest. I do a lot of Pinterest because I try to do like a vision board for each of my books before I start. So I have, pictures of the area that I'm setting the book and what the characters kind of look like. I'll pick out a famous person that they're sort of set after, and so that way I can share that with my readers
Yeah.
while I'm writing the book and say, okay, here's my vision board for this book.
Tell us a little more about the setting. How do you choose that setting, and what do you do about researching it?
For my series, my idea for my first series was I wanted to have a controversy with like a sports, collegiate sports. And I thought, well, I'm in Minnesota. Hockey would probably be the best bet there. So I picked college hockey, and then I thought I wanted it to be around the University of Minnesota, but I didn't want to actually use University of Minnesota, so I think I made it Minnesota University instead. So I just switched it, and so she kind of got in trouble in Minneapolis area, and so I wanted her to get in trouble here and have to go somewhere else to another hockey school, and then I pulled all my husband's friends, what's another famous school for hockey? And I thought, Marquette will do. Okay, all right, Marquette. Okay, I'll put her in Marquette. So that's how I chose Marquette. And now I'm sort of stuck in Marquette. And that's okay. I like Marquette. It's a nice place.
Interesting, yeah. What about research? What do you use, or how do the most research? Do you use Google, or
Yeah.
do you go to the libraries? Do you look at other books? Or?
I mainly, sometimes I'll read another book that's set in the same place, or, like a research book about the place or whatever it is that I'm interested in, whatever subject I'm interested in. At some point, I had to look up, I Googled how to get out of zip ties. And
Yeah.
I think if people looked at my search history, they'd wonder what was wrong
That's
with
what
me.
writers talk about.
Yeah, they think you were a killer or something. I recognized that, like this week, I had some gal come and clean my house this week, and then the two books that were on my headboard were Creative Brooding and Great Lakes Serial Killers. So I thought, oh, she probably thinks I'm a nut. But, that's
Yeah.
what kind of things you end up reading.
Right.
I'll pick up a book or Google something. I mainly Google for research, but sometimes I'll pick up a book to read it. Yeah.
Are you a big reader?
Oh, yeah. Big time, yeah. A voracious reader. My mother read a book a day for her whole life.
Wow.
I don't know how she did that and how she kept up with it, but she did. She'd buy books everywhere and read them all the time. So.
You learn so much that way, and think about that too, is that people are picking up your books and learning interesting things, being drawn deep into these stories, and it really is a trip, an excursion, a getaway when you find a book, read a book that you actually believe the characters, like them, and you hate to see it end.
Yeah, that was how it was with Leah's Choice. I started that book because I had a friend at work who was an Orthodox Jew, and he's a young person, a millennial, and he's starting a family, and I was very inspired by him starting a family and the romance he has with his wife, and it's different because of their Jewish culture, and I thought, I have never seen a Jewish romance, so if I'm going to write the book I want to read, okay, I'm going to write a Jewish romance. And I did, and I ended up just falling in love with the characters in that book.
Yeah, they really are.
I hated to see it end. I kind of miss them now that it's over. So, I really do enjoy the characters that I write so much, and I do sort of miss them when it's done.
Fun.
Well, we're getting close to the end of the program. Any final comments that you have for the audience?
Well, now I'm sort of branching out from romance. I'm still doing romance, but I'm starting to do a young adult romance. So a young adult series that's not so real person oriented. It's more paranormal, sort of an interesting. So I'm branching out a little bit and going down that road. But I'm also going to continue on. Some people have asked for the next generation on my series, so I'm going to start doing that too as well. So if people want to know more about my books or read my books, they can go to my website at patriciamjackson.com, all one word. So,
And how long does it take to write a book, one of yours?
well, this young adult series is started 3 years for that one, but usually for me it's like 3 or 4 months.
3 or 4 months,
yeah.
okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Patty, for being our guest today. This was fascinating.
Thank you so much for having me.
We really
And
enjoyed
Gloria,
it.
I'm glad you were here with us today.
I'm really glad too. I learned a lot from Patty.
Oh, we all learned a
Yeah.
lot. And Bob Johnston, thank you
This was very much fun. Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank
And
you.
of course, our audience, thank you for watching the show today. We will see you next time on Generations.